2019 at 6:30 in the town hall, but it's actually 6:33. And we have with us tonight, we have Dan Ferrero, Paige Rassid, Carl Walton, myself, Jill Conklin, Jennifer Roy, our staff liaison, and Jeff Ford with us tonight, and Glenn Chalder from Planometrics. We're going to review and discuss the first draft of the revised zoning regulations. So let's get started.
Can I come to the table? Is that
Yes,
okay?
yep,
All right. I'm pretty excited to be here. I'm jumping out of my seat. and ready to come
we're
over.
excited.
Well, I think what I want to do is just kind of give you an overview of some of the major changes, if you will, on the regulations, so we can just sort of put all of this into context. So I put together this handout that we can read and read a little forward. I don't know what my
I didn't
printer
even-
did to this, but the
I omitted somebody, Tim
Patricus.
Patricus, sorry. Why don't you guys join us up at the table? We
Yeah,
got
it's
plenty
easier.
of room. We have extra, we'll put a couple of these down.
I gave
Oh,
one
they
to
already
them,
got,
yep, so these are
okay,
for people who've,
okay.
Do you want to break protocol and sit where I'm
No,
not
no,
supposed to
no,
sit?
no.
All right, Jim.
so you got the legs. Yeah,
That's
what I
good.
was- yeah. So I just think it's kind of helpful as we're thinking about the regulations and working on the regulations and talking to people about the regulations to have a sense of what I think the big picture changes were that I wanted to bring to your attention. And then once we've had a chance to kind of talk this through, we can actually start going through the regs kind of piece by piece. I think overall the major direction I wanted to try to go in was to reorganize the regulations to get like provisions together, and found a lot of examples in the regulations that things were in funny places. And I mean, it's your current regs are hard to navigate and find what it is you really want. So that's what I was trying to do and trying to make them user friendly. The first section of the regulations, section 1, is regulatory basics. This is kind of statutory language and setting up the regulations that if it's not clearly permitted, it's prohibited. If it's a maximum or minimum standard, that applies, how the regulations are going to be enforced. So I think section 1 is pretty straightforward. Section 2 is a whole new section on words and terms. There's situations where you had standards in your regulations. I pulled those out.
Right.
Tried to clarify the definition. This is really where you can give me a lot of feedback as we're going through. I've suggested some new definitions or some changes. I tried to highlight those as best I could. I put in pictures because I think that they help people visualize and understand what we mean, for example, by principal and accessory, and why that's important for somebody. Because otherwise the nuances of an accessory use or structure may not be clear, and this hopefully will aid Jen and others in the office when people come in. In the residence districts, I created a new village residential zone. The reason, we got rid of the distinction between the A and the A1.
Right.
And we created a new village residential zone. And the reason I did that is I looked at the prevailing lot sizes in town, and I said to myself, who's non-conforming in a 1 acre zone? And there were clusters of them in
There are.
Somersville and Summer Center. And I said, well, we can create a new zone here which makes more of these lots conforming. We can adjust the side yard setbacks to what's on the ground, but we also put in a density standard so they can't be subdivided.
Right.
So the lots become more conforming, and hopefully for people who are financing and other things like that, it becomes simpler for them.
Yeah.
So there was no alternative, ulterior motive or anything else, really just trying to make people more conforming and recognize what's on the ground today. Created use tables. I would like to kind of get clarification from you as we go forward in terms of parking of vehicles. Everybody knows you can park on your property, but can you park a semi? Can you park a dump truck? Can you park what? Because I think that's an area that could use some clarification today. Added some provisions related to accessory apartments, changed, made extensive revisions to open space subdivisions. That's supposed to be adaptive reuse of buildings on state highways. Added Reuse, yeah, no, hopefully that's not going to happen as a result of the new regulations. I think in the section 4 in the business zones, I created a new village business zone in Summer Center and Summersville Center, and created a village district here, and that's something we should talk about, is whether or not the
Yep.
commission wants to do that. Created a new planned amusement recreation zone on Route 190, which applies to Sunny's I got a chuckle to myself because I managed to figure out a way to name it Par, because it started as a golf course, so
Oh,
it just worked out that way. I tried all sorts of things. I could have, tried to get golf, but I couldn't get that to work. But it's a brand-new approach, if you will, that in a sense establishes that they prepare an operations plan each year for the commission and says, this is what we're going to be doing. And it's fairly precise in terms of, they can't just do stuff on a wing and a prayer. And you actually had good provisions in your regulations already, both with the PDD approach and the special permits you already allow for community events. It's kind of a blend of those two processes and says,
Right.
okay, these standards, which apply to everybody else in town, can now apply here. So we'll talk about that when we get to that section in the regulations. Again, use tables to show what is and is not permitted in the different districts. Found some conflicts in the regulations between whether outdoor dining is permitted or not. One place said yes, the other place said no. So I just think some clarification from you as to what you want to do there would be good. I think section 5, the state DEP and federal government pretty much dictate what the FEMA standards are, so there's really no substantive changes there. And the planned development district is something we set up for the Somersville Mill. Section 6, these are standards related to uses and activities in the regulations, so accessory apartments, open space subdivisions, a lot of those things are in here, and the standards are dictated. Section 7 are standards related to signs, parking, lighting, landscaping, stormwater management, soil erosion control. There's been no standards in your regs. They've been required by state statute since 1985, and they're just not there. So adding that provision in. Some provisions related to access management, pedestrian improvements. Special provisions, non-conforming situations or dimensional exceptions. The language, you might have a front yard setback, but the eave of the roof is allowed to extend into the front yard setback.
Right.
Some towns say you can't, and it's kind
or
of
the front step.
So it's
or
a
the-
standard
front
as to
step,
where you
Right.
measure
that's,
from.
that's all,
Yeah.
you need a variance for that.
Yeah,
It's like, no,
yeah.
let's not be silly.
No, that
Yeah.
is silly.
Yep. I made some extensive provisions related to telecommunications facilities. Your language was sort of taking the approach that the town could dictate, and
We
the
can.
siting council does.
But I think when we put that together, we actually had more influence over it than
Yes. that
we
language.
do now, because the siting council came in and said, no, this is out of your purview.
Yes.
Tell you what's okay and
But I
what's
tried to
okay.
craft this now, so where you do have purview, the regulations are better. Where you don't have purview, and it goes to one of the two state agencies that regulate, there's standards in the regulations that tie into state statutes, so they have to consider our regulations. What you had before, they would likely ignore. And
Yeah.
our intention here was to get you something that would be useful in that regard. Section 9 is about procedures. That was really a situation that there was quite a bit of merging of provisions in the regulations as to what sort of approvals and what process they followed. So this whole section is almost laid out like a flow chart in terms
Yeah.
of what happens with a set of, or an application. And hopefully that will be easier. And Jen and I and others will be working on an appendix, which is like a set of checklists on an application. So that's, in a sense, what we did. And we did make some changes to the zoning map. So, hopefully there you go, you got some
Yeah,
maps.
we all have on that one.
Yep. So,
So one is,
this map is the least helpful right now, so throw the one that says zoning map changes to the back. So existing zoning map shows what we have today. The white is the A zone and the yellow is the A.
A1 zone.
I'm sorry, A1 and the A.
yeah,
Thank you. So we've gotten rid of those, merged those together. And the possible future zoning map shows the major changes, which shows the village residential, the village business, both in Summers Center and Somersville Center. Those are the major changes. The green property on Route 190 is Sunny's. And there have been some suggested, for your consideration, additions to the industrial zone. I think there are sites
Mhm.
which are adjacent to existing industrial zones. And you may recall on the affordable housing application we had on Field Road,
Yep.
it was because we had this sliver of land in the back that it ended up kind of falling in, and it's well configured. It could be industrial development and building expansion, parking areas, it's all been cleared, et cetera. So there are opportunities to consider these things. And so the map, the third one, Jill, now in
Yeah.
the set. The color coding on this is not meant to be fully explicit. It tells you where things change from one category of zone to another. So when something went from, or yellow, for example, it was one type of residential zone, it went to another type of residential zone, and then you would look at these maps to figure out what the changes are. And what you'll see here, the oranges, for example, are the areas that there might be the opportunity for expansion of the industrial zones. And we should talk about that when the time comes. So that's kind of an overview of the major changes. I think that the text changes, it's been my experience over the years that if somebody looks at the table of contents and starts thinking about the type of question that they might have, what they want out of the regulations, this table of contents will help them get to where they need to be quickly. And I think
It's
that
much
makes it-
easier to navigate than what we had.
Yes.
What we had is sort of like going through the statutes,
You almost had to read everything
Right.
to figure it all
figure out where you were.
Yep. Now, the number of pages in the regulations grew. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, I've used the borders on the pages to make space for annotations and comments in the margin. And I've also used quite a bit of pagination to help the sections breathe a little bit. So it's my sense that when we're done, the pages will be less than what we've got here today. But the most important thing is hopefully a set of regulations for you that works, that you're happy and comfortable with. So what I'd like to suggest is that we start going through the sections sort of one by one.
Makes
Get your
sense.
thoughts or comments, make changes as we go. And eventually, I think, have the opportunity to share this with people in the community, share it with Carl. I guess you shared it with Carl already, but bring Carl into the,
Right, I emailed him the first draft.
We didn't really think it was necessary to bring him to this meeting because it's not
I agree,
done, and he's gonna have to go through and approve the finished.
I agree. So I think, I met with Carl as part of the research initially, so I think his comments have been incorporated.
Mhm.
So I think we're good. So I'm ready to start on
Okay.
page one. Does that work for you guys?
Yes.
It does.
Any thoughts or questions here on page one, section one?
So your notes over here in the side are just to give us a view, insight into what you were thinking or what you were trying to replicate.
And where it came
From our
from?
Right.
section, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, that was nice.
So we're gonna abandon 214
One.
numerical coding and go to more realistic stuff like part one.
Yes,
It makes a lot of sense.
So all this will
it's
go
much
away,
more-
we'll be using,
yes.
It'll be
Yeah.
much more user-friendly, it's much more like what they're used to seeing, table contents of a book, et cetera.
Correct.
So I think that's good.
And I think for the town code, which right now, again, I've got it over here. Generally what happens is this simple paragraph goes in that, the zoning regulations are our element 214 of the town code document is,
Zoning regulations.
yes,
Right, and then this is
Available
just
elsewhere.
214 zoning,
Right,
correct.
and then what it says inside doesn't reflect that.
Correct.
okay.
It doesn't always have to get in,
Yeah,
because
agreed.
they're not really good about getting the graphics and stuff in, and the graphics are one of the things that make the zoning regulations really start to kind of come together. Don't think there's anything to, under section 1.2, 1.2A is the exact language out of the statute.
Yeah.
1.2B is some things you had in your current regulations that don't really reflect the statute, but I threw them in anyway. But you get clear authority under A, and I think you can probably do B as well. Zoning map, I think in your current regulations, you had a listing of the zones. You
Yep.
took that out, and the reason is that if your zones change in the future, move them around, rename them, you always have to go back and sort of fiddle with this section. And all you need to say is, listen, the maps that are in the regs and on the map are our zones.
Okay.
So I think it just makes it easier to maintain the regulations. You did have a provision in your current regulations that allowed kind of fudging of a zone line and
Right.
said, and there's a recent court case. What it
That
said
says
was
no,
that
no.
if you had a piece of property in two zones,
Mm-hmm.
you can fudge one zone into the other zone by
Okay.
up to 25 feet.
Okay,
And the court said,
no.
What
that's
about
the zo-
lots that have split zones?
no, that's,
That's
the
it.
zone line is the zone line.
The zone line's the
Okay.
zone line.
So I think operationally, one of the things that I've tried to do as part of the zoning map is to try to, where the lot's small, is follow property lines, so
Yeah.
it's okay. And if you get into a very large property, I sort of left that for our discussion as we go through. So you can have split zone lots. It just creates a challenge sometimes for approval, is that somebody just needs another 5 feet of the zone to get their parking spaces in. And they prefer not to file for a zone change application, but under Connecticut law, the
They
zone
have no
line's the zone
choice
line.
now.
That's what, so,
So if they want the 5 feet, they gotta
you gotta
move the
apply
line.
for a zone change. Or we'll change it, we'll look at it right now and say, you know, the property line's 15 feet away, let's just go to the property line, and make sure we have a good buffer provision.
Mhm.
But the courts have said the zone line's the zone line. Section 1.4 is sort of the basic foundation of zoning. If, Part A, if it's not clearly permitted, it's prohibited. So
prohibited, yep.
that's the way we're gonna approach it. These are the minimum requirements in the regulations. If there's other regulations which are more strict, then you may have to comply with that, but as far as we're concerned, we're gonna do what the regulations say. And you're gonna need a permit to do it, or some type of approval.
So anywhere where it says including is specifically these items. Like elsewhere in the zoning regulation, uses including, colon, it's only those uses, no others.
If it says including but not limited to, I would say you have a little bit of latitude.
But there are some places where it just says including.
Yeah,
Well,
I think,
Does it still?
That's it. Yes.
so let's try to remember those and call those out to make sure that we're getting exactly what we want there. Because if we want a little bit of, you know, fuzziness, yeah. Well, I think, you know, a pickup truck versus a,
Semi.
well, I mean, that's a situation, I think you want a clear distinction. You don't want a
Right.
fuzzy term that includes both.
Correct.
But there can be other situations that we would, I can't think of a good example.
Pickup truck versus a service van,
Or, yeah, or even, you know, farm equipment, you know, we can
tractor
list
versus a manure
a couple of
spreader.
them, but not include a baler, and the next thing people say, well, baler's not listed. And I say, no, we meant that, so. But I think Paige brings up a good point, we should just make sure that we've got that precise. 1.5, you're expected to comply with the regulations, that's why we're doing them, and you can't do things which are not in compliance with the regulations under the statute. There are some exceptions here under 1.5D, which is if somebody got approval from you last week or last month, you can't go change the rules and then tell them that they become, you know, grandfathered if you. I'm not saying you guys, Carl, it's happened, let's just say.
I don't think we ever have, actually.
No, I don't think you have, but other places have. Now, we're in the sidebar, there was a limitation that work be completed in a specific period. And I think if you were saying in your current regs that you have to get like a permit within a year, or you have to do this. And the statutes are pretty clear that, you know, for under site plan, you get 5 years.
Mhm.
And it's been extended, so I don't think you can limit more. But that's something we may wanna highlight, Jen, to ask.
So we've gotta meet the minimum requirements, or the requirements as stated in the statutes then.
Yeah, you cannot. And you, just as you couldn't give a longer time period, statutes say what the period is.
Correct.
Section 1.6 has to do with enforcement. Commission enforces the zoning regulations, the ZEO. Added in this language about the zoning citation ordinances, so that people know that those are available.
I had a quick question on that one, actually. I don't know, I meant to bring my other book, because what I tried to do was look at the current regulations and
It's
compare
harder.
them.
It's harder to do.
I didn't know, well, I was just, and
I
it's
stopped
just
doing that. I tried
probably
to.
one word, but it does, I'm just wondering how it says zoning enforcement officer designated by the zoning commission.
Cause we're
Yeah,
not, we
no.
don't designate the zoning
Right,
enforcement officer.
I mean, I was
Well-
interviewed and hired by,
It was the same thing with the planner, the way the planning rule was written for the planning commission, though, it was that they may hire a planner if a budget is made available to them. And I think that's pretty much the way it's written in the state statutes about the ZBA,
We're
or
gonna
the
ask
zoning
Carl this question.
enforcement officer.
And the reason is that, again, I'm just aware of some situations in some other communities where the first selectman newly elected tried to muscle the zoning enforcement officer in ways that the commission was not in favor. So the issue is, these are your regulations, you have statutory authority to these, you determine how they're going to be enforced. And if you decide not, or to unappoint your zoning enforcement official and decide to do it yourselves or something else, that's your purview. The first selectman cannot dictate to you how the regs will be enforced. So Jen reports to the first selectman administratively, but in terms of zoning enforcement, she takes direction from me. So we're just gonna make sure that Carl.
I can tell you with this group of people, if the politicians tried to influence her, we would disagree.
I imagine, but I just think having the language in here, that you don't want to have it in a situation that says, you know, the zoning enforcement officer is designated by the first selectman who oversees enforcement. That's not, that's,
Right.
I mean, I think in this
right.
town, that role has always been employed by the first selectman.
the,
Employment of a zoning
I- and I
enforcement
think
Yeah, I
officer.
was
that
just
should be
questioning
correct.
the word designated, that's
Yes.
all.
so let's ask.
Because I'm not, appointed or designated. Because I know in some towns.
I think it
do they-
happens.
Do they bring it before a commission and the commission vote, you know,
I
like
think-
we've selected this person and this is who we want to hire and the commission.
It's
No.
the position which is
Okay.
not the person.
Yeah,
So the commission has
okay.
designated
Oh, okay,
the position to enforce the regulations.
oh, okay.
And it's not, they're not gonna appoint Jeff and, well, they might, I mean, Jeff's a good guy.
Well, if they don't have.
Designated by the
CEO,
commission
they
on
might
that line
designate someone else
down.
to- Okay, so maybe there's no question at all, then, you know, we've kind of cleared that up.
Well, we're gonna ask Carl this, cause the, other regulations have said, the regulation shall be enforced by the zoning commission, who can or may designate a zoning enforcement officer. So in other words, it's pretty clear,
right.
Yeah.
and you can designate the
Yeah.
CEO. So I'll just make a note here. James. So that's basically it for section 1. Anything in here jump out at you or concern you or anything else?
No,
Section 2. So this is, again, made some changes in here. I was trying to keep track of revisions markings as I went through, and it just became really a nightmare in terms of stuff. So
Yeah,
you
but-
really have to kind of take it, like, I've tried to be honest here in the margin as to
you mean
what
like
changes
from
happened.
1945 to present, what happened and when?
Yeah.
Where's that original Word doc from
But,
nineteen
no,
forty?
that's part of what makes the statute so hard to read, is
Yeah.
they've included all of that in
Yeah.
there, so.
I've added in this new section, under 2(1)A, section 2, which, if there's a word that comes along that is not defined in our regulations, then we now have the ability to look at these other sources to decide whether or not we
At the
like any of
definition.
those.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Makes sense.
yeah, and I think that these are useful and helpful.
It should keep us from being beaten about the head with new words,
Oh,
terminology.
I've heard it before, absolutely. And then B and C are sort of basic rules about gender and, you know, some of the
Same.
common words like
Yeah.
parcel, lot, zone, district, structure, building, et cetera. On page 9, overall, again, I've grouped related terms together. So in a normal set of regulations, when we see the word accessory under A, and then later on, principal under P, we don't always connect the dots. And so when this refers you over, and now you see principal and accessory together, you understand what we're
Yes,
accomplishing with that.
And this actually makes a lot more sense too.
way makes more sense.
So, and if it's not appropriate for me to ask a question, just
No,
say
you
so.
can, no, feel
certainly
free.
come way
As I
in.
was going through this, I saw references to village district. I didn't see village district defined in these terms. I didn't see it defined anywhere else, and I know when we talked about a village district
We don't
25 years ago,
But
it created panic.
So
The village district we
57,
talked about back
58.
then was a planning thing, I believe.
Correct, but after what we just went through with the transfer station, I don't want people's antennas to go ballistic over a village district if we don't want to define what that is.
It's not really, go to page 57 and 58.
Yes, so you're just seeing the lead into it there, Tim.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
57 says,
Right,
Village
so we
res-
have village business, we have village residential.
Yeah,
I saw
correct.
those.
yes,
What I didn't see was village
Go to the
district,
next
and
page,
later
go to
here on
58.
157 where you say there's a village district, I got a little nervous
No,
because I didn't know what we were talking
on
about.
58.
right there.
Excellent, thank you.
So basically what this is saying now is that the village district is a special type of zoning district under Connecticut
Correct.
state law where the commission has the ability to regulate aesthetics.
That's what I was looking for, didn't see. Perfect, thanks.
The biggest change I think I made here is I added the statutory definition of agriculture. And there have been people who try to use agricultural exemptions for things, which isn't really agriculture. And so I think it's useful and helpful for us to say, according to the state, this is what agriculture is. And so when we talk about agricultural stuff, you're doing
It
this,
should be in here.
all of that stuff comes through.
Yeah.
So I think this is helpful to us, but it's something new, and I just wanted to
Well,
bring
no,
it to your attention.
We had occurrences where we've gotten lost trying to figure out, like, when we were talking about chickens. You know, where exactly does it define all that?
Even like the water,
Yeah,
the
all that
water,
stuff.
the water farm, you know, the spring water being.
Yeah, harvesting water.
Harvesting water, what
That
is
is
that,
considered farming,
I mean, is that farming?
yes.
Yeah, I guess it is, it comes out of the ground, right?
Yeah, and it's a
You-
natural
you just don't
resource
have
that's
to-
being
You just don't
utilized.
have to do anything to
Yeah,
get it.
that
That's
went
the best
all
kind
the
of
way
farm.
somewhere with court or something.
You don't have to
It was
fertilize.
settled,
Yeah, he was
Yeah.
exonerated, right? He
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Gabler,
But that's
Gavel.
not in here, no.
No,
does it need to say
Well,
water?
aquifer's
I
in
mean,
here.
I don't know, aquifer, is aquifer in
I
here?
think there's actually, my suggestion would be that you roll with the state definition, and the reason is the Commissioner of Agriculture is available to help municipalities. So if you get into a question such as this, you can ask them for their input. There's a couple of places in the regulations that we've added in language about generally accepted agricultural practices. What that really means is that if somebody is a gentleman farmer, weekend farmer, really doesn't know how to manage a manure pile, it can get pretty rancid.
oh, yeah.
But there are generally accepted agricultural practices, and the Department of Ag will actually work with the homeowner to get them to understand how to properly
Deal with
treat
it.
with manure, and we're off and running. So we can pull them
We
in.
have a sanitarian who does that.
There you go. So maybe that wasn't the best
Tells them.
example, but
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
are others in
Yeah.
terms of the
Yeah.
way that animals are kept or not
Right.
kept
Oh, yeah.
appropriately. So I think that could be
Yeah.
helpful to us.
Yeah, people notify us of manure piles
Free
quite
range,
quickly.
free range.
Free range chickens on the
Free
property
range
line.
chickens, for example,
Yeah,
as opposed to the ones
Just let
that are
them,
kept in your
just
backyard.
require little passports for them. We should be good.
But when they start dying on the neighbor's driveway and stuff,
The little neighbor shouldn't have hit them.
I think that's free dinner.
barbecue
Make
chicken.
that a permitted use in the district.
Remind you, Jeff, that we're on video, so.
Okay, thanks for reminding me.
So the definition of farm is a tract of land containing 5 acres or more. And I was thinking about tweaking that and asking if we needed that. But then I sort of realized that, you know, you could have somebody of 2 acres claiming that they were a farm to get some of the agricultural benefits. So I kept that provision in there, and I just bring that
Well,
to
we
your
did have the
attention.
regulation before, and I didn't get far enough into this to see where it falls in upon having a horse, and you need an acre per,
Yep.
2 acres for the first,
and then one
1
acre
acre.
per each additional.
Yep.
up to 3 horses, and then you need 10 acres, and there's no limit.
Yeah, so I think all of those,
That one I know.
And I thought for some reason that to be classified as a farm here, you needed 10 acres.
No, 5.
I thought a
5.
gentleman's farm was 10 acres, but it's 5? That's
Our,
nice.
our regulation says
5?
exactly what it says here,
Okay.
containing 5 acres or more with a minimum of 3 acres
Right.
used principally. And I can tell you that the people who interpreted it before me, and when I came here, I was told, well, you know, as long as they have 3 acres, so.
3 acres of farm?
3
Land,
acres of land.
Should it be 3 acres? I
No,
mean,
No, it
it's
should be
5.
5, according
what
to
are the other
this.
2
So
acres
you
gonna
can-
do?
Well,
So-
one of
But-
them's for the house.
well, 2 acres would
So
be for
just
that, you have 3
theoretically.
acres.
go to page 90 just for a second. So here's where I tried to group all the provisions related to horses and ponies, because this is in your current regs today, but I'm trying to interpret what I think your regs say. So I created this little chart.
Yes, this is right.
So then I have the question in the sidebar in the yellow text, which is that, okay, if I own 12 acres, how many horses can I have?
I don't know, that's always been a question. How many horses? You could have as many as you want, right?
Well, I think that some people do have a lot of horses,
Well,
more than one horse per 2 acres, right? The issue is good agricultural practices would allow you to keep horses.
Ours, well, it became a
it becomes, they consider it a commercial.
commercial use
After-
after 10 acres, at 10 acres, it's a
Okay.
commercial use.
Right.
So, but there's never been a limit to how many horses you could have on 10 acres.
And the difference between the personal versus commercial is the, some setback requirements for housing of the
So
horses in the manure.
what is the trigger for a commercial purpose? Is it 4 horses?
It's 10 acres
It's
is the
acreage.
trigger, it's the acreage.
Besides, if I have 10 acres and 1 horse?
No, it's also the number of horses. No, it's-
Is
it?
it's the number of horses.
Yeah, it's gotta be a combination of the two.
It's over three horses and 10 acres. Or 10 acres or more.
I have to find it, cause I have.
I used to have it tagged
Do you
in my
wanna know where it
old
is?
book.
I reorganized your regs to be able to, oh, no, hang on, that's not the document.
My
Says
little
it
book.
on the right there. Just
Oh, the little book.
requires 10 full horses.
So for pleasure, 2 acres
Can I just
for
say
one
something,
horse.
John? This is a perfect case study.
Yeah, I know.
Where is it in the regs? I can't find it.
No, but that's the issue that we had a
We
lot
have
with
it
a
all the
lot of
time.
it.
I mean,
So more than 3 horses, you go to commercial.
right. And then you need 10 acres.
Then, right.
I mean, do you limit the number of horses on 10 acres?
We would think you
I
would.
mean, you,
I think it's gonna end up being limited by the person raising the horses, because there's a point that, I mean, even if you take the horses that are being raised in Summers as an example, I think there's limits to how many horses are raised in each area that makes sense for the function. You know, you wouldn't wanna have 40 horses in an area because they might hurt each other or exhaust the grass or whatever, so it's not practical.
The regulations here, though, once it gets above 10 acres and 3 horses.
We say
it's
it doesn't
considered
matter.
commercial,
Right.
and it then requires a special use permit where they're laying out their use case. And at that point, we have a chance to say, well, you can't really count those 4 acres of your land because that's all wetlands over here.
No, but they can count it if you're if you're
Yeah.
agricultural.
yeah,
That they can count it agricultural.
You would
Right,
count
so I just
that.
made a
Yeah.
note here when we get back to
But for
page
the
90
purpose
to
of
talk this
determining
through.
how many of a population, I think that's part of
So
the consideration.
if I had 20 acres and they were just horses for me and my family,
Mhm.
right? We're
Yeah.
not going to breed, board, I guess, we're not gonna breed, board, or instruct for commercial purposes.
Okay.
They're just for me. Do I need a special permit for that?
How many horses? 50?
20. You
20?
said what?
He's got
I
20.
don't know.
yeah.
20 horses on 20 acres? I don't know.
So I think we got a gap, I'm visualizing a gap in our regulation here,
Yeah.
which is,
'Cause
Yeah, I mean,
you're
the-
forcing somebody who's not really doing a commercial operation to do a commercial,
Special use permit.
But they're gonna have
True,
the,
but-
they're gonna have the amount of manure and, like, you still gotta have the right setbacks from the property line for keeping the animals or the manure piles or the barns or with, right?
Well, held to this, if they have more than 3 horses, if they have 5 horses in 10 acres, our requirement is they're considered a commercial horse farm, and then they have to get a special use permit from the
Well,
zoning commission.
I mean, the way that this grid is set up, the way that Glenn laid it out, it says 4 horses or more, 10 acres. It
Right.
doesn't say you're commercial.
It does.
Commercial is defined by
The number of horses.
no
Did you
breeding,
change
boarding,
that?
and or instruction for commercial purposes.
No, but if you look at our for pleasure says,
For personal pleasure is permitted in any zone subject to the following. That's all it says. It doesn't say anything about how many.
I mean, theoretically, you could have 20 horses on 10 acres there, right?
You could,
Right.
yeah.
If they were pleasure.
Right,
Or even if they're
Somewhere-
not
somewhere
pleasure,
in
even if
here
it's a
it says
commercial,
that.
cause there's no limit on the 10 acres.
Yeah.
cause you're declaring that
I
you're.
don't have my zoning mine tabbed, somewhere in here I thought it said that you're, if you have.
Okay, but the proposal would be for it not to no longer make that distinction, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah, I mean, I would suggest that,
For it not to make that distinction.
What, for
Or
pleasure
for
or
it
personal?
to,
not that once you hit a certain number.
that
it's
you're automatically considered commercial, yeah, I
Because the
mean,
funny thing is this, if I came along and I decided I'm gonna buy a horse for every member of my family, it says in here that I can build a barn, 100 feet from the property line.
mhm.
Well, I got remarried or I had another kid, I want another horse. The issue is,
Cool.
I just kicked into 200 feet from the property line. So the issue is I can't have the other horse because I can't, the barn is doesn't meet the yard setback? You see what I'm saying? So,
So the
Well, it says
commercial,
storage of waste, it doesn't say barn.
and
building,
any
no,
area for
buildings housing
horses or
horses.
ponies.
Oh, and horse
Yeah,
buildings.
cause then for pleasure, I guess, is the top, right, the 100 feet, and then down
Well-
below is the commercial 200
So-
feet.
You
let's
can't
not
have
get-
more than 4 unless you have 10 acres.
I agree with that.
And on your 10 acres, if you can't get 100 feet from the property
Right.
line, you got a pretty weird
No, but the
ass
question,
shaped
I
lot.
if I wanna have 5 horses.
Well, it has to be 200 feet.
It has to be
It has to
200
be 200 feet,
feet.
'cause
in
it
the-
does say, so this is what
It
I'm
doesn't.
thinking, it says the
No,
first.
down
Five,
here.
five horses, but 5 horses is also 10 acres. Anything 4 or more is 10 acres of land, sir.
So you have to declare whether it's for pleasure, or whether what you're giving
No, I think-
lessons, or is
I
that?
think it's hard for us to determine the intent.
Yeah, you can't,
That's where it becomes a challenge. So I think what we ought to do is try to find, when we
But
get
then-
back to page 90, we should try to figure out a situation that says between 1 and
Yeah.
100 horses, this is the way we're gonna deal with it. Up to, some communities, for example,
But-
say that you can have 1 horse for every 2 acres. And then, if you wanna have more horses than 1 per 2 acres, you need to prepare what's called an animal management plan, which clearly identifies the grazing areas, the manure areas, and all of the other stuff, so that we can evaluate its impact. And say your property is well configured for more than 1 horse per 2 acres. Sure, you can do this, as you've shown us. Or they say, that's a pond. You can't have no, that's not gonna work, so we wouldn't do it that way. So we'll come back here.
Okay.
I'll just make a note about animal management plan question.
just trying to think of if it's a factor for us anywhere.
Well, I think the idea would be is that.
No, because there's more than one concern in town that's raising, has a commercial horse.
How many calls a month do you get for, can I have a horse?
I haven't had any in a while, but sometimes you might get a couple.
No, I'm
depending
thinking
on-
more of the commercial.
You're thinking of like what,
There's,
Shallow
there's,
Brook or?
there's, well,
There's
Shallowbrook
one up on
is boarding
Springfield Road.
and riding lessons, et
Lessons.
cetera. There's one up on Springfield Road, there's one up on Watchog
Watchog
Road, and
Road.
then there's the Antonacci
Yeah, it is
complex, but that's spread out
over,
lots and
I would
lots of
say if
land.
you're raising horses and pasturing them out, you need an acre per horse.
you need 1 acre. per
Seems,
horse.
that seems fair.
Yeah, it's true, because you're gonna be
Just
next to
grazing and-
somebody with a $1 million house, and you're not gonna have a manure pile for a lot, cause they chew it all up if they don't have enough,
Mm-hmm.
it ends up all dirt. If they don't, they chew all the grass up instead
Yeah.
of eating it, running around in it, but you need a good acre per horse. Even
And
2
so we're not
per,
saying that what you wanna
3
propose
acres
doesn't make
is-
sense, cause it sounds like it
It's interesting.
brings us to still the
Yeah.
next level of planning here.
Doesn't sound as big.
All right, I'm back on page 10 now.
Okay,
So I don't think there's anything major in here. Over on page 11, the question, I guess, had to do with basement versus cellar. So, trying to remember now how building height is measured in your current regulations. I think it's 2 stories. Hang on a second.
It's 30 feet, I think.
That's business.
You had a good graphic on the roof, on those,
Yep.
Alright.
So, maximum.
on the next page.
Hang on, I'm not quite there yet, though. Building height.
It's somewhere else in there,
So,
where it says that it's measured.
yes. Is a basement or a cellar a story?
Wow. And it could
I
be
don't
if
know,
it's
is
a
it
walk,
in the
is it,
ground or above the ground?
if it's a walkout, is it a story?
Only on that end. In the front, it's probably
So
not.
here's the challenge that we have. As I look at your regulations for building height, you regulate building height by feet and stories.
Yep. We did in the past, yep.
So the question is, well, what counts as a story? Because you actually have what's called a half story. Your building height in a residential zone is 2.5 stories, but your regs don't define what a half story is. So we're gonna wanna get to that, I think.
Yep.
But the issue can be a basement versus a cellar. And so this is meant to show that, for example, what, some people just always use the word basement,
Yeah.
but we can define a cellar as something which is predominantly below grade, right?
Mhm.
You don't even know it's there kind of thing. And the basement could be a walkout basement. And more than half of the height is above grade, in which case that could count as a floor. So the net effect is most people grade the foundation so that it doesn't count as a floor.
For example, if you look at my house,
Okay.
we have a ranch,
Okay?
okay? The grade, ground level grade on the south end is the garage.
Okay?
The other end of the house, you don't see it because it's built into a hill. So the measurement from the north end of our house is 1 story. Technically, from the south end, it's 2
Correct.
because the garage is exposed.
So you don't have an issue because you're a ranch, but there have been situations that I've seen in other towns.
What difference does it make whether it's a ranch that has an exposed
Well,
end
When
or a
the fire
2-story
department
Because if
house?
you're
comes to
two
your
and a-
house to
if
Well, as
you're-
long as they don't want to get in
Right,
from the
for fire,
driveway, they
exactly.
can do
the
it.
driveway side, and all of a sudden
Well,
you've got a
Like the Knights,
three-story
the Knights of
building.
Columbus Hall.
Right,
Right.
the back, the
One
back,
story in the front,
the
2 stories
back's
in the
3,
back.
the
Yeah.
back's like 3 stories when you get
But-
done with it.
But if you go to a house that's got a 9-foot basement, that's a walkout, 9-foot high ceiling, then they have 9 foot on their first floor, right? And then another 8 feet up there. I mean, that's a pretty tall house. That's a
But now you're
2-story
only- But you're
house.
still only at
But you still,
30
if you
feet.
go around the back to fight a fire or something, you're looking at almost 30 feet in the air before you hit the roof.
So it's exceeded our height. Technically, it's
Right.
exceeded our height limit.
In one location.
So does the issue of stories in the building and what we do with the basement or cellar, is this something we would like to regulate? What do we really do today, Jen? You got any sense on what
Doesn't
we do
usually
today?
come up now.
Hasn't come up much, we don't
We
really
don't
have
build
much, but,
Well, no, we,
yeah, there hasn't been a lot of new
There-
construction and the ones that we have had, some
Usually a
of
full
them are right
basement.
at,
yeah,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
there's not,
There's
Yeah.
one now that we have is the raised ranch, where I think this comes into
Like the
play
half.
for the most part, where you have 50% of the foundation
Right.
exposed.
needs to have
Yep.
3 feet of fill around it, is the way I read this. It's a little confusing when you say wall height. But the way I always interpret it was that half of the foundation, like you think of a raised ranch, you could have the garage at grade and the back walkout, but you gotta have the front and the side, at least 3 feet of
Phil,
fill around the, say, above the basement floor.
right.
Talking about 3 feet of its wall height below grade, I guess is the same thing, is it?
Well, I think I can find us a better definition of this phraseology. So the issue, it sounds like if a basement is predominantly out of the ground, we're gonna count that as a story. And then if it's predominantly in the ground, we're gonna call it a cellar and it doesn't count as a story. Does that sound reasonable, or? we
Is it
should
about fire accessibility, or
Yeah,
is,
well,
Well,
what's the?
the part of the
real
regulation
purpose?
is because we know we don't have a snorkel truck, okay? And we didn't wanna build in to the regulations a bunch of structures that would be taller than our ability to fight the fire.
So, I mean, it can be a sensitive issue if we don't define it clearly, because if you can have a 2.5-story structure and then you can have a basement below it, the neighbor could be looking at a 3.5-story wall.
Yeah,
Right.
what the heck's a half
Or
story?
it even looks like, well, I mean, that's, so actually, if it's a shed dormer on the back, you can have 2 stories, a shed dormer, and the basement wall, and that looks like a 4-story building. So the issue ends up being, it's one of appearance and aesthetics, but it's also one of character and scale. Fire protection certainly weighs into the mix. I'm not looking to change dramatically the nature of development in Summers. I just think it would be clear for people to say, okay, I get it. I know what 2 stories are. Now a half story, I get that, and I can do it this way. And, you know, the basement or cellar will kind of address that.
The half story you're saying is like a walkout.
No, a half story is generally up in the attic.
Yeah, it's
Oh.
like the shed
Yeah.
And
dormer.
it's more than,
So if you have an attic, that's a half story.
Like the high roof lines, some of those houses have the
yeah,
high
so for
roof
example, if you
lines,
get
too.
to a flatter pitch roof, there's generally not enough height inside to get enough floor area that makes it count as a half story. But what happens in some communities or some situations, they start steepening the roof, or, excuse me, they even go to a gambrel.
Mhm.
At that point in time, you essentially have a 3rd floor on the
Yeah,
house.
yeah.
And that, again, has an impact on others.
And we still don't have, like slab. Believe it or not, people
Crawl
have asked.
space.
Well, that's what this is trying to get away from, I
I
think.
know, but you know, I mean,
Because if you didn't have that 3 feet of fill around half the foundation, it'd be a slab.
I mean, right
Well,
now, I don't think
we require.
a basement.
Right.
Yeah, right now we require at least a 4-foot crawl, right, or a full yeah. So what if somebody didn't wanna have a basement? This has come up.
It's not
Somebody
allowed
wanted to
for-
build,
It's
and I
not
said,
allowed.
and I
It's
said
not
you couldn't
allowed.
build here in Summers, cause it's not allowed. So,
Well, actually,
That's out of here. So there's 2 things that have changed. Number 1 is the requirement for a basement, and number 2 is the minimum floor area.
so what are you saying? It's not required? You can build on a slab? Because some people like
That's-
to do that with radiant heat and,
Yep.
I mean, it's getting,
absolutely.
This does
And-
not require that you
our
build a
zoning does
basement.
not allow it.
Right.
Currently,
Right.
correct.
So I think we should allow that. So,
I think, to me, it's a matter
I
of,
do too.
because I've had people ask about it, cause they wanna build these energy efficient homes with the radiant heat in the floor and they don't wanna spend the money on a basement.
Well, and I think in some cases, we force people to build structures that have leaky basement floors because we insisted they have a basement.
Yeah,
Where maybe simply a
area.
function of the water table being high,
Yep.
and we made them build down into it, and so then they gotta spend an
Yeah.
extra $30,000 or
I
$40,000
would like to
to
see
keep the
that
water out.
worked into our regs.
there's
they-
no prohibition in
Okay.
these regulations. I
Okay,
believe
cause I
I've
saw
taken that
basement and
out.
cellar, I didn't
That
see
makes a lot of
slab
sense.
or, but,
No, this really meant to be the issue related to building height and
Okay.
perception of building
okay.
height. So, I will clean up this definition, because I think what you have today, and I don't think it's clear. So, this graphic, I think, and a picture is gonna get us to where we wanna be. So I will take care of that,
So we're also taking out the minimum square footage?
yes.
Minimum square footage for all property, all homes, yep.
Don't think there's anything else on page 11. Anything jump out at anybody there? Page 12, I think these graphics, I need to clean them up a little bit, but make it clear to people that almost any type of roof that you're gonna do, this is how you're gonna measure building height on that type of roof.
I think the regulation now says what, to the highest point?
Yep.
Yeah,
'Cause some of these are like halfway up the roof.
But I think that's the way the building code measures it.
Yeah, but I mean, our regulations now say peak. So that's
Correct.
another change, where someone will be able to build a bigger house, higher peak now.
Well, you could get more pitch on it. So, I mean, years ago, what would end up happening very often is the houses, based on lumber and stuff at that time, were about 24 feet deep. Now with engineered trusses and everything else, you're getting houses that's 40, 42 feet deep.
Right.
What happens when you put a roof pitch on that is it can get up there quite a bit.
So they do gambrel them more or whatever to try and cut down on the height of the center of the roof.
they can, or the other thing that they often have done is flatten the roof pitch out, which isn't always as an attractive a look.
It's not smart in the Northeast.
But it's the way to comply with zoning. So if we're concerned about total building height, I mean, you can adopt a regulation that says, building height is the midpoint between the peak and the eave, and then total building height.
Again, just slap me if I get out of line here, but I want to go back to the slab question, because if you're eliminating a requirement for a basement, you're not technically requiring a slab, and you've got rid of the minimum square footage, are you now opening the door for somebody to come in with a tiny house and park it in a lot and say this conforms?
That's what I'm thinking.
Well,
So
no,
you
it's
might
gotta,
wanna-
it's gotta have a
because slab,
foundation.
It's,
Where
yeah,
does it say that, though?
That's a.
well,
It doesn't
You
probably,
don't know
but
if
it
it's under
should.
600 square feet.
doesn't have to have a
Like
foundation?
one of those mini
So,
houses or?
right, so, and,
So it'd be
and,
on what?
Building code is
Pi-
something.
Pilings?
so this has happened in Massachusetts
Or on a-
where
or on
some
a-
communities are now forced to accept tiny homes because
Yeah,
they oopsed on these, so just throw it out
So-
to the table to discuss, what do you wanna do with
I
that?
think there's worth things that you have to accept in a tiny home though.
Sometimes they're on wheels, right, so if
Right,
you
they
want one of
just-
those
But that's a
parked in
trailer.
They
Somersville.
drive it up here for
Yeah.
the.
But that's a
summer.
mobile home.
Yeah.
Well, it's
So
not-
I'm just
is it-
suggesting that you
Yeah.
consider it as part of it.
So Tim, the big issue here is the state Supreme Court has said you cannot regulate minimum floor area.
really.
Okay.
So, builder's service versus East Hampton is the case.
So you
So-
cannot
Can't regulate.
regulate
There's no
square
rash
footage
space.
anymore.
Let me back,
But you could say that they need to
we
be
have it in our
supported by a
regs.
foundation or a crawl space, yes?
uh,
Permanent
hang on, there's too
home.
many questions on the table. Let me go back to Jill first. The court has said you cannot. There's no rational relationship between public health, safety, and welfare and minimum floor area requirements. It is an attempt, the court said, to use zoning for exclusionary purposes.
Right.
So there is no basis for it. If you do it, if you have it in your regulations, you can do it, but if somebody challenges or appeals it, you're probably going to lose. So I will do what you asked me to do, but my starting off point is that the court said you really
Right.
shouldn't do that.
We can still
So I need to
regulate.
advise you that you shouldn't really do that. If you say we want to do it anyway, because we've been doing it for years, I'll
Yeah,
do it.
No,
I don't get the basement requirement. If somebody wants to build a slab on grade, why would,
No.
no,
I
I think
understand.
that's
Foundation,
foundation.
So is the
permanent
slab the same
structure.
as a
Needs to be,
foundation?
you're gonna build a permanent structure,
Come
nothing
up
on
with
wheels.
statutory.
Well, it's like if you buy a shed from
There
Cloder
you go.
Farms,
Right.
they'll come and deliver it on a bed of stone
gravel, yeah.
and just drop it there and now you have a structure. But if you put it on a foundation, it's taxed, everything's
think-
different,
Well,
right?
building code requires, right, 600 square feet, I think John has told me this, you need
Accessory
frost protection. So then that is where you have to have at least a slab, you have to have a foundation under it.
And footings.
600,
Footings,
600
footings.
square-
42-inch footings down the sides,
600 square feet?
yeah,
Mhm.
or more.
Wow,
So my family room wouldn't technically have needed that, it could have been
well,
on.
a tiny house is probably 400 square feet.
Yeah, some of them can be,
I mean,
Yeah,
I
they're
Theoretically,
wouldn't,
it
you know,
could-
if
it could
somebody
drop it.
had
You
an
could
acre,
do-
if somebody had an acre lot up in the woods and wanted to put it,
Up
I
in the woods.
I don't, I would, well, you know what I mean, like, well, I guess, I mean,
What
you
if
have,
somebody
I
bought
guess
an
if you're
acre,
keeping your lot
an
size
acre lot up on
requirements,
Hall Hill Road and wanted to put a tiny
Yeah.
house on it?
or what if they take one of the lots in Somersville Main Street? So it's just a question asked. I
Okay,
don't wanna
yeah,
have a
no,
decision.
no,
It's that
no.
We need to look at
It's
how do you
a
wanna
good-
handle
good
that,
thing to
'cause
bring up.
it's- without a slab or a basement or a cellar requirement, I don't know what we're opening the door to, so.
And tiny homes are adorable, but
They
mobile
are.
homes are maybe not
No,
so much.
Exactly.
mobile homes aren't,
You know,
Yeah,
imagine,
homes in
imagine
my mind.
it's the same thing though. I don't think there's any difference in what we're doing here between a straight up mobile home and a tiny home.
So statutes say,
I
and
think
it's
you
just
need a
reading that.
foundation, I think you need,
Statutes say you cannot treat, blah, 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 blah.
does this really say that?
oh,
As I defined it
One of the better
every
statutes
section
I've
says
heard.
that.
Such regulation shall not, this is about zoning regulations, this is 8-2 of the statute. Such regulations shall not impose conditions and requirements on manufactured homes, and that's a different term than mobile home.
Yep.
Having as their narrowest dimension 22 feet or more, so in other words, they quote double wide, because
Yep.
they come in 11-foot sections. Built in accordance with federal manufactured home construction safety standards or on lots containing such manufactured homes, which are substantially different from conditions and requirements imposed on single-family dwellings.
Right.
So the issue is, I think, I'm not quite seeing a
Can't have
regulation that I
different
know of that
regulations.
says you can't use manufactured, we have to be very careful in the use of trailer and manufactured home. But I don't see anything in here that says you can't have a regulation requiring a foundation.
In
Or
my,
a
in
slab
my
or
mind, a
some type of
manufactured
footing.
home and a trailer aren't the same thing.
Uh,
I mean, I see the houses come up the highway and get set on a
No,
foundation.
no, I understand.
Right,
Yeah,
right, a
that's a manu-
modular,
Modular home.
modular.
Yes,
Yeah,
I agree.
manufactured homes.
Yeah.
I agree.
They set them on piers too.
They do, they send them on piers, they send them on
They'll
Yeah.
set 'em
crawl
on-
spaces,
My friend just
whatever.
bought one that's piers. It's a 22 by, it's
Where was
Yeah.
it?
in Belchertown. It's in a park actually, of them.
Yeah, but that's,
So it's like a
Different.
mobile park, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they don't call it mobile because they
No, they
take
don't
the
have
wheels
wheels.
out from under 'em, you know.
Right, right.
Yeah.
trailer park, no?
No.
Please don't.
When I say Wacky, I call it trailer park, right? They're,
Yeah,
manufactured homes, really.
manufactured
What
home.
are they doing in other towns? Glenn,
Yeah,
like
have you,
where you
Is it an
from, where you're
issue?
from or whatever?
It generally has not been, I mean, with the price of land these days. Most
Yeah, I
people-
mean, someone's gonna spend 90 or 100,000
Requirements of the health
to
code
put
and
up a-
everything
Yeah,
else
but
start
what
to
if-
dictate
what if you
it
live,
is.
what if, Dan lives here and he goes, I'm gonna give my son that acre and he can put his tiny house up there?
He did give him an
Well,
acre
that's
and he
what I'm
built a real
saying.
house.
So, but that could happen, right? Cause you don't,
If they could use a manufactured home, instead of being 360,000, it would be 220,000.
But you could always use a manufactured
But you
home.
still,
right, you
you
can.
know, well, you still have to put a full foundation under it to be,
In this town, you would,
Yes.
right, today you
Well-
would, but not.
footings or.
A-
Well,
Actually,
not-
you'd be better off I mean, if you're being sensible about it, the right way to do it would be to put it on a crawl space or something.
Basement.
Frost walls.
yeah.
Basement.
Well, everybody's used to a basement now. in some
Anyway,
ways.
I didn't mean to derail.
Yeah.
that.
No,
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 it's an important policy
Yeah.
question. The issue is,
Yeah, otherwise they-
I've made a
Put
note.
them
In the closet.
Well, and how it ties into building code, right?
in, you know what that's about.
Again, John,
And it's tough
our
to
building
get it all.
official said there's
This was in the hall.
You gotta go
600
on
square
your
feet
pack.
requires,
You
for
know,
building
something.
code requires them
So what if I have 599 now?
Get there.
Then you don't need, then you don't,
11 by
you can put it on
22 by
stone.
what?
right? Who would wanna do that anyway?
That's for an accessory structure, isn't it?
any
I think,
structure.
Any structure.
Well, any structure.
I think
once it
both
hits
Carl and I would
600
give you the
square
same
feet.
answer, which is the state Supreme Court said,
Yeah.
you really shouldn't be doing this.
Right.
If you decide you want to do it, we'll put it in the regulations and
No, we're just.
Sally
No, we're not- we're not
just-
saying
We're
what's-
playing what if
I don't
and
think we're
asking
saying what
questions.
size the house or the dwelling has to be, I think we're saying what is gonna be under it. Is it gonna be, is it gonna be, pillars,
Stone.
concrete pillars?
Or is it not for us to worry about it
Or-
in zoning,
or we
and
don't-
is it just for building code to worry about it?
Yeah,
Yeah, 'cause
So,
you gotta have.
I
for
can't say I've
us,
seen a
the
zoning regulation that
footings, I mean,
requires
You
a
gotta have at
foundation.
least,
Ours used to.
you know, 4 feet.
Ours do-
right
ours-
in
this
the
does.
Ours
You have
required
to
is
have a
not only a
foundation.
foundation, a cellar.
Plus this-
yeah, and if you're
plus
putting
the-
in
you have to have a
addition,
cellar, then you
yeah,
have
and
to have
if-
a foundation,
Otherwise
that's
it's
correct.
hot.
So
Yeah.
it's not a
Crawl
direct
space,
requirement.
technically, you have a foundation.
What'd you do
have-
for
You
your-
have footings,
addition, you put a full foundation or a 4 foot?
we'll put a full foundation.
Yeah,
But we did it because we decided that's what we wanted.
and you use the basement too.
Because we put an addition on the end for a family room and we put it on frost walls, but it's a crawl space.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is an accessory part of the house. The main part of the house had a foundation on it.
Yeah,
You should see what Ellington did then, how they did it, cause they have some homes down there, they couldn't go down, so they went up, you know, with just, I
Oh, and put
think
the
they
foundation walls on
the
the
foundation,
ground.
and then they went up. And to get at any, you know, all your plumbing and everything is up under there. The guy going down there, hands and knees or the back to work on anything, you
Yeah.
know? It's all insulated, but even now, you won't get a
Yeah.
leak now and then. It'd be interesting how they wrote that, you know? See what they required for footings and, stuff like that for the, it's a whole, there's a development there, of them. It's, you know where the bank is, used to be United Bank, it's, on the right there.
All right,
You
so
know,
let's
on
keep
the
going,
83,
because
yeah.
I'm gonna ask you guys to make a note, on page 41. These are the dimensional standards and other things like that for a residential development, so just make a note here, foundation, question mark, floor area, question mark, and let's talk about that further when we get here.
Okay.
page
Now we're on
Back
13.
to 12 and 13, yeah. So Jen, I think this is gonna be a question here for you. Wasn't clear to me in your current zoning regulations that you had, a zoning permit and a certificate of zoning compliance.
We don't.
So, it might be something for us to think about in the future. So generally speaking, a zoning permit is something that would be granted when I'm gonna apply for a building permit. I'm gonna build something. statutes say that the building official cannot issue a building permit unless there's a zoning permit. So the zoning officer looks at it and says, yes, you comply with the yard setbacks and everything else, zoning permit, then they get the building permit. But then, sometimes there's not a follow-up, which is certificate of zoning compliance. So now the building's built, somebody wants a certificate of occupancy.
Mhm.
Where does
Yeah,
somebody
it's
say?
complied with your zoning permit.
Correct. So what many municipalities do is this two-step process. A zoning permit allows something to happen. The certificate of zoning compliance says you did it right. And
The way we do
so-
it is zoning official or zoning officer signs off on a building permit.
Same thing. It's
It's not a
function.
separate permit.
I just think there's some advantages in the regulations to calling it that. So even if on the
So
zoning
even on the
permit,
permit it
when
said-
somebody signs off, you know, I
You're
sort
not
of,
talking about a whole nother piece of paper or anything.
No.
it could be,
But it
some
could also
towns
be a
do.
line on the CO that says zoning compliance.
Yes, certified, boom, done.
If it's, a separate permit, would we have to collect the $60 state fee? Cause I've heard among us
Good question.
zoning people that that's why a lot of towns put it on their
As a
building
line on the
permit,
permit.
as a line that the zoning officer signs off on. It's the way we do it here, it's the way we did it in Vernon, that if there was a zoning review fee, or otherwise we'd have to charge the zoning review fee plus the $60 state fee. Which when I was in my Casio classes, that's what they said we're supposed to be collecting if it was a separate permit.
Yeah, I think that, let's try to figure out if there's a way that we can construct this, that we don't have that result.
Right.
I would like for you to have a clear sign off, even if it's on a building permit application or something else, that yes, I hereby authorize you to
I
initiate
do.
construction.
I do sign off on the building permit.
But the sign off isn't quite as specific as I would like it to be. But I wanna look at the regulations here and the
So
statutes and everything else, so that we
Then
don't,
something on the CO that clearly says that zoning
without
compliance
having
was
to
met.
require the additional $60. So it's a distinct act, but by doing it on a building permit, I'm just trying to figure out how to get rid of now, later on in the language, the certificate of zoning compliance, not call it that, but
Why
make
would
sure
it,
it's
why
a
would it be
discrete
an
act.
extra $60 if it was part of the CO?
No. If it is part of the CO, but I wanna make sure I look at the language I used in here for this certificate of zoning compliance and figure out how we reword this.
And we're trying to avoid the extra fees to save the end
It's a
user.
$60 state fee
It's the
for a
state.
land use application, so meaning like right now we charge $45 for zoning review. There's a $60 fee, so basically they pay
We lose
$105.
$15, right?
$105 instead of
Oh,
$45.
so that's added on to it.
$60 extra, yeah.
We don't get it.
We pay that to the state, we only
No, I
keep
know we don't
$2
get
of it. For every land use, so for every zoning commission application and every ZBA application, we take $60 extra.
Right.
And then we pay
Send it
that
to the
quarterly
state.
to the state for each application. and
So you're just saving the
contribution.
people in the town $60, basically, if they're gonna do
We're
something.
saving the applicant $60.
Yeah, yeah.
Right,
And
yeah.
I think that there's a procedural benefit from doing it this way, but subjecting somebody to the additional $60, I think we can figure out a way to do this
Well, you
without
have,
doing
you have a
that.
much better audit trail if you have all of these things tied together to know that, yes, they were issued a zoning permit, and yes, they complied with the permit.
But I think if it's just a little box on the CO form that
Right,
says.
and sounds to me like it could go that way.
I would agree.
There used to be a blue piece of paper that followed everything around here, and I don't know if it still does. But it had sign-offs for, went from here to there, and it got signed off all the way through, and it went through the process, and then
It's
it was.
actually on the actual application, so on the
Right.
backside, the front is an application to build a house.
Right.
And it's got sign-offs for all of us, myself, the sanitarian, for Jeff, as
Now,
town engineer.
so, in other words, you pay $60 once for all that?
Yeah.
We don't take $60 for a building permit, it's just a building permit application. And we charge our building permit fee,
Right.
and then sanitary review and zoning review fee.
But you only take 60 once for it?
We don't take 60 at all for a building
So
permit.
Take
uh,
45
you're all
plus
saying the
I'm
same thing
getting-
differently. In
Yeah,
other
I'm getting
words,
lost.
if I come along to apply to build something, I have to pay the fee for a building permit, $45 for
Right.
zoning,
No, I know, and so
Plus
much money for
60.
sanitarian.
bingo, I have to pay all those fees.
We don't take the 60 right now
It just comes out of the building
for a
permit fee?
building permit fee. We just charge a building
But
permit fee.
you charge the $60 on the zoning permit fee.
No,
To the,
You
to
said
the
You
applicant?
said 45 plus 60.
no, I said we would have to if we took a separate zoning permit.
What are we
That's
doing now?
I was told that if we took a separate application as a zoning permit, if you call it a zoning permit application, it's
Okay.
$60
All right.
extra dollars.
All right.
So
let
you're
me- let me-
taking $60 for the application of many permits?
No,
That
you're
we're
not, are
surrendering
you
to the
sending any
state.
money to the state?
Yes, for ZBA applications, for
Site plan
zoning
review.
commission applications, conservation and planning. So for the land use commission applications,
Subdivision.
Oh, not for the permits?
not for, the money that goes to the state, John pays the 26 cents per thousand in building permit fees to the state.
All right, so let me think about this. I'm not, I don't think I'm a fan of this. And it has nothing to do with the money going to the state. But the statutory process, I think it's 87D or something like that, says, the building official cannot until there's a zoning permit. I think
Yeah.
that's the language used.
Yeah.
So I think you need somewhere along the way to have some individual
Yeah,
permit.
I'm not questioning that, I'm just saying how it's done,
Yeah, I understand.
yeah.
So I will look at this. Anything else on page 13?
Couldn't you call it zoning approval or something like that?
Statute, I'm gonna read the statute again.
Okay.
It's just one of these things where it's pretty specific. So you had a definition of the word conditions, which I just really, I didn't like much at all. So I deleted that definition. So I don't think Carl's gonna have a problem with that, but we should.
Now, is that like conditions of
Just like-
approval?
Was it,
I mean,
Yeah, so the word
like where we ask people to change the siding on their structure?
necessary
and-
requirements or stipulations to ensure compliance with the objectives of these zoning regulations.
Was
The
kind of a
objectives.
catch-all.
I know it was, but
I mean, it's the impetus for why in the Henny Penny, we asked them to,
I think you can do it. I don't know that you should define it, though.
oh, okay. I thought you said that we should just,
I'm not really wild about this definition.
okay, no argument.
I think you can,
It's
you
sketchy
should
because
continue
it's
to
sorta
apply
open.
conditions of approval. I just don't want to see you in court trying to justify that what
Yep.
you did as a condition did or did not meet this standard.
Right,
I think
yeah,
That's my concern.
I'll agree with you based on that explanation.
So in terms of the definition of dwelling, tried to clean up here. Your current definition, I think, says not more than 2 families. And I think it started to play out through the regulations that every time the word dwelling was used, it implied that it could be for up to 2 families. And I
Mhm.
think what most communities do is say a single-family dwelling is a single-family dwelling. It's not a
Right.
single-family dwelling which allows up to 2 families. So I think it's cleaner if we simply say a dwelling is for 1 family. You can have an accessory apartment, you can apply for a 2-family, or you can do these other things, but you don't get it under that definition which said up to 2 families. So I tried to make it clear, if you will, this distinction between what a dwelling is. There was a definition for energy efficient, which I took out. The energy efficient was a escape clause that you didn't have to put in a foundation if you wanted to do an energy efficient, a solar heated floor that would.
Right. Radiant heat.
Yep. No, it wasn't radiant. It was like if the sun came in and warmed up the floor.
solar?
Yeah.
Yep.
And then the definition of family, there's been quite a bit of case law in terms of definition of family. And I think this definition here allows any number of people related by blood, adoption, marriage, civil union, or legal guardianship, and up to 3 additional unrelated persons living together as a single housekeeping unit. So it's 1 kitchen, they're all sharing it. You meet this definition, you're good to go. your definition had head of household and domestic servants and a whole bunch of other stuff,
Going
which
back
is
to
really,
1945, when that was
I think it was
popular.
1890. Couldn't find the exact date. But this is a fairly common definition of family, and I think it passes the test.
And up to 3 additional
politically
unrelated
correct, yeah.
persons, there you go.
Reasonably politically,
the
nothing is
in-laws.
politically correct
Yeah.
these days.
Cooking, yeah. Okay.
Page 15, deleted the definition for floor area because it was really only specific to the residential floor area requirement. The definition of functionally dependent facility was relocated to floodplain. And then the definition of private garage, it used to say, no occupation or business for profit is carried on. And the issue could be that sometimes people in a home occupation use their garage for storage of copier paper or, you know, what they're selling on eBay, et cetera. I didn't think we needed that restriction or limitation there. Bottom of page 15, we have a definition for group care facility. It's not used in the regulations. The regulations that we do have use the phrase convalescent home, nursing home, home for the aged.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't sure if we were defining this, because then if it's not permitted in anywhere, we're clearly saying you cannot do a group care facility in town? Is that our intention, or?
Now, this would
wouldn't
include
think so.
like adult daycare? Yes?
It's a residence facility,
Yeah,
so
so
it's
it's
housing
housing.
people.
people who are age disabled.
Oh, this is a residence
Wait.
facility. Oh, residence facility, okay.
So it seemed to me, we either put group care facility as permitted use in some of our districts, or we don't take the definition out because we're not using it, we don't need it.
We don't currently have any.
We don't. It doesn't mean we wouldn't have one.
There have been some in the past, but there aren't, there haven't, I don't think there's been any in 20 years.
Well, I wouldn't know I wouldn't know that long. Was there one?
Yeah, the Demers
Oh, was that-
property on the corner of Four
No, I'm just
Bridges
trying to think
was
here.
originally a
Was
convalescent
that,
home.
that was for older people? then?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm just thinking, for example, something like an Alzheimer's facility. This was an Alzheimer's facility, I'm just reading this definition, I think could fall under this. And it might not be a convalescent home, nursing home, or home for the aged. So if we were to allow this in the same places we allow convalescent nursing and home for the aged, we might be able to allow for an Alzheimer's facility or something else like
But
that.
are those persons suffering from an infirmity or disease?
Yeah,
So it is covered
Covered under, which one are you reading,
under the
page?
convalescent home? I mean,
True, yep, infirmity, disease, or ailment.
Is this referring to like a group home, you know, where,
Oh,
No,
on
this is
Mountain
for
View
age,
Road?
this is for
no, a group care facility
who are
for
aged.
age disabled or
Okay,
need a
Rehabilitation.
rehabilitation.
well, it could
Well,
be.
so who are aged or disabled
Or
or
need
so
a
I'm thinking,
yeah.
there's people
No, it
with
could, yeah.
developmental delays, they're in their adult life, they live with it, then the
Group
people
home,
come,
yeah,
like the
yeah.
chrysalis and whatever, how they come
to your home.
check.
No, they live
there's
in a home.
homes that like
All right,
3 or
They-
4 people live in them,
well,
And
could
they-
we
then
add
they have
somebody
staff
comes-
that comes
the other
in,
definition
yes.
Yeah.
and kill this second
I
one?
don't think
no,
we
I'm
have.
actually thinking, I'm leaning now, I think, to leave this in. I think that,
I'm not sure I get what you were talking about.
like a
but-
group home, like
A
they're
group home.
retarded people, mildly, or they're retarded, they're disabled, they have Down syndrome, they have some autism, they're
I didn't know there
adults.
were, I didn't know those, they existed.
They do
Oh,
exist,
they do
there's like,
exist.
No,
there's,
no, in summer.
Not in summer.
but-
I don't
That
think
doesn't
there's-
stop them
that's
from-
not
No,
to
I
say they
understand.
wouldn't, so why, I'm saying you probably should not remove it, I don't know, it might be a problem if you, with the
When-
ADA,
yeah,
if you
when-
remove it,
Well, when some people age up, they're 19, 20, and they,
Right.
25,
They
they
live in a
move out,
house.
they live
Yes.
with their parents
Right.
all these years, and now they
Right.
move into a group home
I
where they're
understand
living
what it
on
is.
their own with
I thought you were
care.
making reference to the fact that there were some, that was why I was having. a
no,
hard
I
time
know
finding
it,
yeah.
cause we would know
I'm
about
okay.
it.
Let's leave this.
We don't
There's
have
about-
any, but we could have.
Right,
Anything on page 16? Yeah, so I moved the home occupation standards to elsewhere, and I think we'll probably spend some time talking about that. Home occupation is, again, a business or activity carried on for personal gain within a dwelling or on a residential property.
Mhm.
Anything on 16 or 17?
This definition, right, dog, grooming of dogs in the commercial kennel.
Yep,
So with that being in there, we don't allow dog grooming facilities in town. Is that normally in the definition of a commercial kennel?
No, this is, I think, carried forward from what you have today.
It is, right.
Yeah.
I think that the issue would be, maybe we carve out a third. Personal kennel is you as an individual can
Right.
have up to 6 dogs in your
Mhm.
property and get a kennel license from the town clerk. Commercial kennel would be the boarding,
Right.
and then
Grooming.
grooming
mean-
would simply be a commercial operation, so it's
Someone
no
wanted to do
different
it
than a
next door.
hairstylist.
Someone wanted to do it next door to Town Hall, and that gold yellow house next door is for sale, right, Jen? Someone wanted to do that there.
Somewhere around here, yeah, several,
I
I
mean-
get this often that people wanna open up
We
a
told
dog
them, no,
grooming.
it's not
We
allowed.
tell 'em, right, it's just because, and
The
most
house next
people,
but there is dog grooming in town.
there is dog grooming in town, I don't know how,
Oh,
but
there is dog
is.
grooming
I
in
Some
know.
of some of it predates the regulation.
Right, but,
Re-
most people who call and say, I wanna open up a dog grooming facility, say, they don't keep the dogs, cause usually they don't, you drop them off for an
Right.
hour and then they're gone.
Oh, no, understood. Or they're
So to
there
me,
for
a
a couple
kennel,
hours.
they're keeping the dogs
Overnight,
overnight
boarding.
for, right. So, to
And
me,
then-
they're two different things.
They are.
They are
So
two
I'm just
different
wondering
things.
why
They
they're
are.
in the same definition.
And I still don't want them in my neighborhood,
Be allowed in a business
you
zone.
know?
It can be allowed in the business zone, though.
Yeah,
I mean,
Next
it wouldn't
door,
be a bad
urban-
business next
no,
door,
no,
or in the
it's
Gold
business
House,
zone.
or wherever.
But with the way the
Right.
regulations are
It's-
now,
it's a
we're
Just not
business.
allowed in the
They've never
residential
been
zone.
allowed, yeah.
Right,
Well, the problem, though, Jill, when it became an issue before, was it was occurring in the residential zone. Back when there was
In-home
that whole big
business or
uproar
something.
about it about
Well,
15 years ago.
It still is here and there.
I mean, Red House Kennels predates all of it, so that's been there.
They've been there.
And the dog groomer up off of Watchog Road's been there.
She's been there,
God, as long
Marion.
as I can.
Marion,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Yep.
you know, but some of these places up in Somersville, you know, people have
Yeah.
inquired about them, like, you can't do it.
No, but, I mean,
Yeah.
to me, you mean along 190 in those,
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
Wouldn't
Delivers
it-
houses, it would be perfect.
But wouldn't
Right.
it run it like a hairdresser? You'd want it to have city water and sewer or
But they
city
do.
sewer?
Well, I don't know about the requirements, I'm just saying that
But we
it's
don't allow it, yeah.
But
the
they do.
definition.
All those do have city water.
Yeah, oh, I know, I
and
know.
sewer.
I'm just saying that's,
that'd be more
But
of a
if-
state health department regulation.
Yeah, I don't know what the state
I don't know
says
how they
about what's
regulate
good or bad.
dog grooming.
Okay, so I made a note here in my book on page 59, which is, now we're getting into the business zones, to have a discussion there about animal grooming
Okay.
facilities,
Right.
as to where we would permit it. But I think I agree with Jen here that back on page 17, the words "or grooming"
Right,
should come out.
right.
So the issue is, a personal kennel is you keep dogs for yourself, commercial kennel is you board for other people. But grooming, that's a service that you may provide.
Or you're raising dogs for sale. I mean,
That's a breeder.
isn't that part of what is prohibited, though?
I think,
As opposed to a,
no, I think what we're saying here is, six
No.
dogs is the limit. So that if it's for personal use, up to 6 dogs, you're good.
right,
If it's more than 6 dogs, or
right.
for business purposes, now you're in a
That
commercial
would be a
kennel.
groomer too. I mean, not groomer, a breeder
Uh,
would probably fall into
An
the,
operation or activity
commercial
maintained as a
kennel.
business for,
I mean, it depends on how many dogs you have.
but you could have a litter of 8 and you
Yeah.
could have 8 dogs overnight,
Yeah, true.
Plus the mother.
plus the mother.
So that would
So you're
work
gonna say
for that first.
boarding or breeding dogs or cats?
I don't know.
I
I
had
don't know.
agreed.
I'm just, I don't have,
It says
I
for,
don't-
or sale. not
No
for
pets?
s-
no pets.
It's for or sale.
I'm a petless person.
Oh, well,
That's okay.
that's awful petty of you.
That's,
Oh, all right, motion to adjourn. All right, clearly we've hit our limit here tonight. I'm on to page 18. So these are, again, just sort of lot-related terms, and I think that the graphic here is meant to, for many people who don't deal with land use or zoning on a regular basis, what is a front lot, what is a rear lot, et cetera, so.
You talked about the rear lot having less than minimum frontage.
Yep.
Does it say somewhere in here what the frontage should be?
Nope.
For a rear lot? No, I think that was a point, we should, let me make a note of that back here.
We generally
We don't-
frown on
we don't-
flag lots,
Well, they're not allowed, because you need 175 feet of frontage.
I know.
Right, so,
So now this one is saying that you can have it.
Well, no,
So
it's
a
just
change.
Well, it's
giving
just
you.
defining-
It says
Yeah,
what it
lot
is.
What it
related
is.
terms, it's just what it is, that it's allowed.
I have it.
Because I think it's important for people to understand that it's recognized, even though it may not be permitted. You know, it's like and it's, you're just trying to show where the front is, correct?
Would you
Just
put
show
a-
if someone
would you
wants to
put-
do that, you can't do it.
yeah, but would you put a note there, like
But
an
it doesn't
asterisk,
say,
like,
it's just,
flag lights are
terms.
not,
Well,
flag
I think
lots
that's,
are not
right
allowed?
now, I have rear lot on page 35
Yeah,
as
rear-
being allowed by special use permit. So I was doing that, but I wasn't aware of all of this history, so if the issue is we don't
Well-
want to do that.
well,
I don't know if
we
we
didn't say we didn't
didn't
want
want
to.
to, no.
What we're saying is we hadn't.
Our current regulation is you have to have 175 feet of road frontage.
Yep.
Wherever it is, could be at the back, the side, all added up has to be 175 feet. So traditionally, we have not allowed flag lots, but it doesn't mean we're not open to change. We can talk about
Yeah, I
it.
mean, there's certainly, we could have a discussion on it. I don't think that, you know,
When we get to that section, so if we do allow them, then we would, Jeff is saying we should specify
I mean,
the frontage for
Right,
that.
but if we don't allow them,
my perception
then we
is
should
it's
make
not a
a
good
note that this
practice.
is not allowed, because someone will see it and think, oh,
Yeah, it's parentheses.
like what you're
not
saying.
allowed.
That's
Yeah.
what I wanna do.
That's what you want to-
all right, Dan.
And I came to all this land use stuff with an open mind about it, and I think it was Merv Strauss who explained the disadvantages of flag lots.
I think
Because you end up developing a lot more marginal properties.
so what some towns do is they limit the number of rear lots that you can do.
Right.
Because otherwise,
You
what can
open
end up
up-
happening is somebody actually extends the public road,
Mhm.
becomes a municipal obligation over time. So,
Yeah.
I actually did a seminar at a APA conference not too long ago. There's a situation in the town of Colchester that we played this game, we had a picture up on the screen, how many driveways are in this picture? And there were stacked rear lots that were double loaded, so like 6 driveways in a row.
Right.
Front lots, and then lots
Rear
behind
lot.
those, and then lots behind those.
Oh my God, double.
And along this section of roadway, it was not very long, it was like 27 driveways. It was
Crazy.
crazy.
Right.
Yeah,
So that's a situation which really does frustrate fire protection, a lot of the other
Right.
things. But having, I think in Avon, it was a special permit, you got like 1 per subdivision or something, no more than
okay.
5% of the lots or something like that.
But
So I
that
think,
makes it different because then it's handled when the subdivision is proposed.
but subdivisions have to be in compliance with the zoning, so we can
Correct,
dictate
but-
or limit.
But we have pieces of land with a little bit of road frontage, with a
If-
lot of
if-
land
if
in the
we-
back,
If we
so-
open up
No,
rear
no, but I
lots,
think you should limit, don't allow them
Right.
without standards, right?
and that was the concern, was that without a standard, something to
Mhm. Need a standard for,
constrain it,
For
it would
rear
just be
lots.
My
a
note,
free-for-all.
If you wanna make a note, go on ahead, is page 35,
Yep,
bottom
Good.
right.
yep.
Okay, so
Because
back-
I'd agree, I mean, especially in a subdivision application, if you knew going in what the layout was of all the land, and you knew also that it was allowed under zoning in a limited way, then it would be planned in. You know, it's like shared driveways. Those are the ones that really end up becoming roads after a while, where the town has to go in and make it a road. Because they don't follow along with their
Yeah,
arrangement.
and some towns, again, we'll talk about that when we get there. Some towns dictate that the access way for a rear lot has to be dimensioned that it can never be a road.
Right,
So road has to be 50 feet wide. And so
Right.
the access easement, even if
25.
they're stacked, is never more than 45. That's it. Because we have no intention
Right.
You know what you got yourself into when you bought this lot.
Yeah, it's supposed to be 10 feet off this property line to your neighbor, so if you've got a 10-foot drive, 10 feet on one side, 10 feet on the other side,
You
can't
need
be any
30
narrower
feet.
than 30. And you don't want it to be more than 50,
Right.
so say minimum 30, maximum.
So let's have this
45 or
conversation about
something.
rear lots.
Okay.
I mean, I think,
Oh, it's definitely,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
not opposed to it, talking about it.
yeah, I think the town of North Stonington had a limit. And what it ended up doing was creating more road construction, which became a municipal obligation. And their response was to say, you know what, maybe we should,
And you have more area, right, Glenn, in here for rear lots, it's
yes,
60,000.
I said double.
Oh, double.
Oh, a double lot, like
Double-
instead of
double
being
the
an
size.
acre,
So
it
it'd
has
be
to be
80,000.
2 acres?
Yeah, I mean,
80,000
that's-
for a rear lot.
That's sort of been my approach over the years always, is that a rear lot has to, minimum lot size is double, the yards are doubled. Carl didn't anticipate that someone was gonna put a lot behind him. He doesn't want the neighbor looking down, so the issue is the
Right.
neighbor's got double the
Cause your
setbacks.
backyard becomes their front yard, kind of,
That's
like
nice.
in some ways, I
Exactly.
know.
Correct.
I see it a lot in East Windsor, they're
Yeah,
just,
right, but Broadbrook there,
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, there's quite a few of them.
they put up arborvitae's or try
Yeah,
to do something.
But it
between
still
them.
looks, I mean, it looks a little, I mean, it's nice when it like comes around and it like, this house could face this, I mean, I don't know,
Yeah,
yeah,
so I mean,
we should discuss it,
yep,
all right.
page 20 and 21, anything here?
The one we just did up off of Parker Road is a flag. Oh, no, we didn't do it here, we did it in conservation.
There
Yeah,
was
that
a
was
lot
a
of-
lot of record.
Yeah, but it was a lot of record
Yeah.
from before, it's the one that abuts Smith's.
It's
Yeah.
only 22-foot wide area.
The driveway's about 5,000 feet long or something.
Yeah.
Crazy. Cost them a
500,
fortune.
maybe 500.
Yeah.
Anything on 22 or 23?
Well, that date, I don't think is correct, is it, Jen? That date that says effective date of these regulations, or is it?
May 12,
I
19.
thought it was December
I
8,
think that's one of the-
1953 or
Yeah,
something.
no, that's your subdivision, I think.
Okay.
All that
Yeah.
stuff is in my.
It was in the
I looked
late
it up.
40s.
Yeah,
and
you did
early
look it
50s.
up. So I'm rolling with what you gave me, there you go. Good,
Yeah,
thank
so
you.
I'm thinking of a subdivision.
I think
Yep,
so.
yep.
Anything
Yeah,
on
you-
24, 25?
Do you really need these pictures?
Yes,
I think they're
I
very
think they're
helpful for
nice.
people. When
Yeah.
people suddenly look at, I see the
Yeah,
light
that's
bulbs
right.
going
When I look
off.
at this,
Some
I
people
know
are
what's
visual.
principal
Some
and
people
what's
are visual.
accessory.
That's the whole idea.
I love it, I love the pictures.
Yes. Page 26 or 27? So I took some words out here that weren't being used in the regulations, and I moved some standards which were in the definitions to the standards section.
Mhm.
Over on page 27, I think I'd like to add in a definition for half-story for you. Because when you define story,
Okay,
is the portion of a building between the surface of any floor and the next ceiling above or the roof above. That means that anything in the attic is actually a story.
Yep.
And I know we don't mean that, but that's the way the regulations interpret it. So I think when we specify exactly what a half story is, people, again, will get it. Anything on 28 or 29?
These are the way they're in our regulations now, if you didn't have any changes over here on the right.
I'm pretty sure, Jeff. I mean, it got to the point, I gotta tell you, that I was telling Jen, I was sort of down in the rabbit hole on these because there's so many different pieces, and it's like an ingredient where you're taking a little bit from everything and trying to pull it all together in a meaningful way.
But the blue doesn't mean anything other than,
The blue is simply a box to let the reader know that these are terms grouped together to hopefully aid in understanding of what we're talking about. So all, rather than have mobile office in one place, storage trailer in one place, and trailer, just put them all together, and now you understand the differences between them and, you know, what you
Mhm.
can or cannot do.
I didn't understand your unit of occupancy, see sign and regulated terms.
Yeah, so if you go,
I know our sign regulations,
It's on page 26.
so, yeah, so what they do here, what you do here in Summers is,
Unit of occupancy,
yeah,
any
so it's like a
structure.
tenant in a multi-tenant building. That's your unit of occupancy, and then the signage they get is related to that. So it's a term I hadn't seen before, but I see how you're using it, and I think it works. It's
Yeah.
only applied in the sign section. It's not applied anywhere else.
okay.
You gotta, if you have a better thought or word there,
Is the question, why is it related to the sign terms?
I know why it's related to the sign terms, I just didn't know
think
why,
she
I
was-
didn't know if that meant, like, we have buildings in Somersville that have like 4 apartments,
Mhm.
you know, 4 units of occupancy for
Yeah.
renters, so that's why, like, when you read this, it's only related to business. But that's
But they don't
not
have
the case.
signs.
so
That's my point.
the only way that, all right, so if there's a, if that
I
phrase,
understand, I know a unit of occupancy is how we determine the size of the sign.
I can find another word.
But I didn't know if for a specific definition of a unit of occupancy, if any of it would relate to rental,
You mean-
residential rental units.
So, do me a favor, ask John as to whether or not there's anything in the building code that, where that phrase is used elsewhere. So we don't wanna cause confusion with the health code or the building code or anything else. So if
Right.
somebody else is already using that term, we'll find a different term.
Right.
Because this is only defined to apply to business, and then it's only applied to business signage. So if we can use the term, we will. If we need to change it, we can.
Could you just call it business
Yeah, I was
unit of
gonna say,
occupancy?
can you say business unit of occupancy? I mean, that would clear up the question of whether it would be
Business
For an
versus
apartment.
residential.
or residential. Yeah.
For an apartment, it doesn't apply because it's not a business.
Right.
Well, it is,
True.
but you don't get the huge sign because you've got 25 apartments.
Or like for the corner lot. That's crazy too. We gotta address
I'll ask
that.
John.
Well, I think actually using
Like
business
that
unit of
mattresses,
occupancy works.
remember that big sign? Mattresses
Never done.
for sale, antiques,
You
mattresses,
know,
I
we're
forgot
lucky
what.
we never had to see that.
We never had to, we had to see that.
They got it up.
They
It
had
was
it
up, oh yeah, it was
But
up,
then they
it was
went out
like
of
a
business, so
billboard.
it's
I know, and then
Well,
they
they
left the
did.
sign up for like 2 years after
Yeah.
they went out of business.
What's the collector's
Because they had they were a corner lot, so you used the road frontage to calculate the
I
sign.
think they were technically antique mattresses if I read the sign correctly.
That did say antiques, mattresses,
Because
they
they couldn't
didn't sell
afford the
many.
dash.
You
in
wonder why they
between.
went out of business.
Flea bag mattresses.
It was also a gift shop,
And
if
a
you
gift
liked
shop.
what she liked.
Yeah, whatever.
Well, you didn't like it. Okay,
Just
so
wasn't around about that term.
Right,
So that was gonna be an ask, Carl.
yeah.
relaxation,
Yeah, it just doesn't seem,
a relaxation in the terms of.
Let's relax.
of the-
just mellow out. Just roll with it. Yeah, okay. Okay, you're good.
29 top.
Yeah. Keep working. Don't give up.
Kumbaya.
There you go. Anything else on
Yeah.
28, 29?
What'd you call it,
Yeah.
variation?
Oh,
Violation. Why is that only flood related?
How about broadening?
By issue a notice of violation or a citation for violation of the zoning regulations, which probably should define violation.
Violation.
no, that's a good point too. I'm gonna word search it, figure out when and where it's used.
Yeah,
I think I pretty much word searched every term in here that was defined, so I'm pretty sure
but now that we
violation.
have the,
Citation ordinance.
Is there another definition in here somewhere for zoning violation? No.
no,
It's just violation.
yeah.
And
So
this is the,
if you define it as what a violation is, it would relate to flood related and it would relate to.
No, this is where we always have this problem. So for example, floodplain uses terms which are not used in a conventional way. So they use the word development in a way that we mean development in the zoning regs differently than the way they use the word development. So we have to be very careful as to how we parse out. So I created a definition section back in floodplains. So I just need to see if we use the word violation elsewhere in here.
When I type a letter, a notice of violation, like if you look
Understand?
at our procedures, if you tie them together, I mean, if anything
Is
that
that what
went
the
to
citation
court.
ordinance says, notice of violation?
You're looking for where that is,
Yes.
Tim?
So let me do a word search for it, and then we'll figure out what to do.
Yeah,
Page 30 and 31. So this is kind of a subtle change, but it could be an important change in the regulations. So many communities use the concept of setback in yard differently. So a setback is measured from the property line in. So a property or a building has to have a minimum 40-foot setback.
Mm-hmm.
Yard is defined from the building out. So when we say you cannot store an RV in a front yard, what we mean is you cannot put the RV between the house and the street.
Right.
Or we could say you can't store an RV in the minimum front yard setback, but they're two very different things. Because that would mean that the RV can't be in the first 40 feet, but you could have it between that and the house.
Oh.
And what we're
Yeah.
saying is no,
Right,
hey, we don't
right.
want swing sets, play sets, or other stuff in the front yard between the
Right.
house and the street. Unless the house is in the back half of the lot or something else like that. So this is meant to set this up for use as we go through the regulations, the difference between a yard and a setback.
Makes sense.
And then I think here on page 31, the locations of yards, and this is a silly little question here, but what do we do on hang on a second, here, options, corner lot? So,
Well, they have frontage on two sides.
yep.
you
And
have
then what are
two
the
front
other?
yards, then you have a rear yard and a side yard, whereas
Two
Right.
side yards.
No, you have two
You
sides,
have
no,
one-
no
I'm
rear.
saying this.
Do you have two
description
sides? Why would
showed
you have two sides?
rear.
Because you've got
You
two
don't have a
fronts.
rear?
Because generally what happens is,
Or
so
you
the
have two
question
rears.
is, why do we
No,
care about
one's
the
enough.
yards? And so the issue is, if you think about it as a block or a street, normally what happens is you have a side yard between you and Carl, you each have a side yard, and then Paige and Carl have a side yard in between.
Yeah,
So what happens when you now turn the corner? Is it a rear yard abutting a side yard, or is it two side yards abutting each other, or what in fact should it be? And so where it gets crazy is that if you have a corner lot that's got more than,
What if you have the last lot and the road goes all the way around it? I didn't see one of those here.
right,
I think
Stay
it
away-
is.
stay away
I think
from my
when you have two
graphics.
front yards, a lot of your land is taken up by the front,
By the
two
front
front yard
yards.
Yeah, because you're
setbacks.
50-50.
So that's why they always looked at it as two side yards and two front yards.
so some communities say a corner lot is gonna have two fronts and two sides.
sides.
Other communities say corner lot's gonna have two fronts and a side and a rear, or one rear opposite the longest front and everything else is a side. And you can imagine how convoluted it starts getting.
Yeah.
So you're already
just pick
whacking a
something
lot
and
with two
stick
front
it.
yards. So some communities just,
Yeah, you got 100 feet
Well, the way you
there.
have it worded there, Glenn, is correct. On a corner lot, each line shall have required a front yard setback, and all other lots require a side.
right, but I'm not sure that that's what you guys do today. I'd have to go check that. So,
But the graphic doesn't match your words.
correct.
Okay.
That's why it says over here, review graphics, because I need to make sure.
Gotcha.
If
Yeah, because it says rear yard.
So your question is,
Where?
do they
It-
want a
that
rear
says
yard and a
rear yard.
side yard or two
It
side
should say
yards?
side yard, side yard.
So let's you and I
No.
work on this.
Yes,
No.
Let's
yes.
figure out what we do today.
He said he has a
Okay.
typo in there.
Yeah, the graphics are not,
No, corner, that's
graphics are
corner
not
lot.
tied to the, see, this is the power of a graphic. These are graphics that I had, and I put the note out here, review the graphics, because once we figure out what we want to do, I'm gonna make the graphics match what we want.
Okay,
Oh, okay.
So I'm gonna work with Jen to figure out what we do
Okay.
now. And then we'll tweak this.
Okay, and a rear rear lot's got one front and 3 sides, or whatever, I guess.
Well, 2 sides in the rear and the front, just like a regular lot.
Yeah. But this one, Jill, should be this one. It's on a corner. It's got 2 fronts, one on each of the roads.
Right.
And it's got 2 sides.
Right.
Or,
2 sides.
well, it's got a rear and a side. I mean, the side and the rear are both 25, aren't they?
No,
It's
the
40,
rear,
40
the
and
rear
25?
yards, the rear
40
yards
and
Plus,
larger.
it'll,
Structure.
it'll be
Yeah.
different in the village residential, if we go with the village
And for the
residential.
principal structure, it's more.
There won't be any new, there probably won't be a lot of new construction in the village residential,
Probably not.
unless something happens to some of the structures
But we
that
are
there.
talking about changing the side yard setbacks.
Yep.
So we'll talk about that because,
Well, it's blank here. It just shows that there's a difference.
yeah. So I'll work with Jen on this and we'll come back on that. That puts us to the start at section 3. I think that's good.
Yeah, I do too.
So I think,
We
section.
got through a lot.
Yeah,
Next
I-
time, we're gonna go through, well, we'll go as far as we can.
Yeah, I think that,
Well,
the residential section, there's gonna be quite a bit of discussion in here.
Section 3 is pretty big.
It's got 20-something pages, so I think that the biggest things in here, if you guys could familiarize yourself with the language that's in here, the yellow rows in the tables are new concepts for discussion. I
Okay.
tried to highlight these. Some of these are issues of two-family dwellings or rear lots or adaptive reuse. I do have a question in terms of accessory use of motor vehicles and parking. What can people park on their property? What do people expect other people to
Okay.
park? And then I think after that, home occupations, age restricted. There's a whole new concept on open space subdivisions, and
Yeah, next time. Good,
thank you.
thank you. This is coming together nicely.
Well, I think I appreciate your feedback, and we'll make this right.
Okay, so we gotta make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Carl made a motion.
Second.
Paige seconded it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion carries at 8:15.
Anyone ever been opposed to adjournment?
No,
Yeah, yeah.
not allowed.
Are we
Not
out?
allowed.
What happens if he wants to call the meeting to order? No, no, I'm not gonna make that.